Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So a lot has changed since the summer of 2022 in the NHL, but no singular team has had more roster changes as well as just overall objective and goal changes than the Calgary Flames. So today I want to do a little video essay history recap on how the Calgary Flames in the matter of like 18 months went from all in to a nuclear rebuild. This of course starts after the 2022 Calgary Flames were one of the most electric teams of the last decade, finishing with 111 points in one of the best lines we have seen in recent memories of the now legend Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk, Elias Lindholm. Gaudreau finishing with 115 points, Tkachuk 104, and Elias Lindholm 42 goals, 40 assists, and 82 points. Markstrom was a Vezina finalist, and they had arguably the best D-core in the NHL. And during that season, they were super aggressive. At the deadline, they traded a first, second, third, and a fifth to get to Foley and Yarncroc. And of course, the Calgary Flames would get their first series win since 2015 when Johnny Gaudreau scored a game-winning overtime Game 7 goal to clinch the series. But of course, sadly, they would lose to the Edmonton Oilers in 5 games, and that offseason brought a lot of uncertainty as Gaudreau was an unrestricted free agent and Matthew Tkachuk a restricted free agent, which Johnny Gaudreau would exercise his unrestricted free agency rights, deciding to sign with Columbus in order to be closer to his family on a 7-year deal at $9.75 million. And then in mid-July, reports came out that Matthew Tkachuk wanted to get traded. So then Flames general manager Brad Treliving had a really tough decision on his hands. Would he trade Tkachuk for a bunch of picks and prospects and kind of go towards the route of a rebuild, ending off the Gaudreau and Giordano era? Or would he trade Tkachuk for win-now pieces and still try to contend? By the way, if you follow me on TikTok back then, I screamed at the top of my lungs to trade Tkachuk for a bunch of assets and finally hit that reset button. But instead, he decided to trade Matthew Tkachuk for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt in a 2025 first-round pick, which seemed like a very solid return for the Calgary Flames, considering Huberdeau was coming off a 115-point season where he finished 5th in the Hart on the President's Trophy winners, as well as just being a 92-point pace guy the prior 3 seasons. It wasn't some fluke. He was a legit star at the time. And as for Mackenzie Weegar, after being a 7th-round pick back in 2013, he had fully developed into a top 20 defenseman in the entire NHL, within 2021 having 36 points in 54 games, finishing 8th in the Norris, as well as also having 40 points in 2022, finishing 14th, and was an analytical darling. So even though me and others liked it a little bit more long-term for Florida, considering the fact that Tkachuk was 24 and just signed an 8-year, $9.5 million deal, the following season, everybody agreed that Calgary won that trade, considering the fact Huberdeau was only making 5.9 for one more season, and Weegar was making $3.25 million. Meaning for that next season, they were getting a player of Matthew Tkachuk's caliber, as well as a top 20 defenseman for the exact same cap hit. They might be able to contend again. And of course, on top of that, you got Cole Schwindt, who's a pretty solid prospect, in the 2025 first-round pick from Florida. They go on to sign Huberdeau to an 8-year deal at $10.5 million, and then they land the biggest free agent still on the market of Nazem Kadri on a 7-year deal worth $7 million, coming off a season where he had 87 points in 71 games. Brad Treliving fully believed in this core, and they were looking like contenders yet again. And actually, as part of signing Kadri, they had to ship out Sean Monahan in his $6.375 million contract with 1 year remaining, giving up a 2025 first-round pick to the Montreal Canadiens. Which, in fairness, at the time, Sean Monahan was a negative asset, but as we know, the following season, although he got hurt, he yet again returned to pretty solid form, and then last year was like 30-30. But all that aside, heading into the 2022-2023 season, the Flames had 102.5 points over-under, which was 5th in the entire NHL, as well as the 7th best Stanley Cup odds. Vegas and the public were treating them as a favorite to win the Pacific Division and actually contend yet again. And right before opening night, Mackenzie Weegar signs an 8-year deal at $6.25 million, locking up this Flames core for at least the next 2 seasons, and a couple pieces are here for a while. However, shit kind of hits the fan to start the 2022 season as they start out 10-10-3, and by New Year's are 18-13-7. It wasn't some fluky start where they were just getting unlucky. Their new acquisitions that were supposed to be stars were not living up to their contracts or their trade, with Huberdeau having 25 points in 35 games, Uyghur being very solid defensively, but only 9 points in 37 games, Kadri 26 points in 37 games, and Markstrom was already on the team, but he was the Vesna runner-up, and he had an 895. By the deadline, they were mostly out of it, although they didn't sell anything. They were 27, 23, and 13, losing games like the New York Islanders last year in overtime in the shootout, and they finished 38, 27, and 17, but we're only 2 points out of the wild card. So entering the offseason, there is a massive switch for the Calgary Flames as Brad Treliving goes to become the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Craig Conroy, former very good Flames player, becomes the now general manager. And Conroy kind of doesn't allude to any direction of the team. He says that he kind of wants to win, but also they're going to think about the future, think more down the line, but it looks like they're going to run back mostly the same team. They do make a big trade by trading away Tyler Toffoli, but it's not some trade that you maybe expected where they'd get a first or a second and a third round pick. They trade him away for Yegor Sharangovich, who was a year removed from 46 points and 25 years old, and a third round pick. So they kind of thought that Sharangovich was younger and could be like 80% of what Toffoli was. This was still trying to win. So yeah, this team still had a solid squad. If Huberdeau bounced back, this could easily be a playoff team, considering the fact they had a top 3 defense core, probably the best top 4 in hockey, with Hanifin, Tanev, Anderson, and Uyghur. And entering the season, they had a points over-under of 94.5, as well as 30-1 cup odds. It was a boomer bust year considering they had so many UFAs, but winning was still the priority. And they started off okay, going 2-1-1, but then had a 6-game losing streak, including losing to the Edmonton Oilers at the Heritage Classic, which the Oilers, if you remember, were horrible to start that year, with a 1-5-1 record entering that game. Then shit really starts to hit the fan after a November 10th loss to the Toronto Maple Leafs. They were 4-8-2 after that, and it comes out that Nikita Zadorov wants a trade as he's a pending UFA and wants to go win. Craig Conroy, after this trade request, comes out and says that he's not going to panic, he's not going to rush a trade, he's going to think this through fully. And then on November 30th, 20 days after the initial trade request, the Flames were actually winning some games. At that point, they were 10-10-3, but he decides to trade Zadorov to the Canucks for a 3rd round pick and a 5th round pick that was Chicago's. So they're still not blowing it up or anything, but after November 30th, Jonathan Huberdeau kind of spirals. He wasn't playing good before then, but he had 15 points in 23 games. His next 12 games, and basically for like 4 weeks, he doesn't score a single point, basically proving to Craig Conroy that this contract, he's never going to live up to it. It's going to be one of the worst contracts in the NHL, and the Flames probably just should sell instead of the sunk cost fallacy with Jonathan Huberdeau. The fact that they gave up Matthew Tkachuk, who's coming off such a fantastic season, he decides it's probably time to sell. So a month after this Huberdeau 12-game scoreless streak, and the Flames at this point were hovering around 500, not making any progress, and in fact lost 4-5 entering the All-Star break, he decides to ship out Elias Lindholm. And the package from Lindholm was pretty big. There was a lot more pieces, but I'm just going to name the big 3. They got a 2024 first-round pick from Vancouver, Hunter Brustevich, who was the defenseman that went in the 3rd round in 2023 and was putting up absolutely bonkers numbers, as well as Andrei Kuzmenko. Now, Kuzmenko at the time was a cap dump because he was making $5.5 million and was not nearly scoring at the same rate that he did prior when he had 39 goals. But as soon as he got traded to the Calgary Flames, he had 25 points in 29 games for them and really found his game. And now they're probably going to be able to flip him at next year's deadline. And as for Lindholm, he did struggle a bit during the regular season with the Vancouver Canucks, having 12 points in 26 games. But come playoff time, he was pretty solid, including some clutch plays, having 10 points in 13 games. Funny enough, after that, the Flames won 7 out of their next 10 because Kuzmenko was just playing so goddamn good and Sharangovich was on a heater, and they were in the wild card race considering Nashville was like in the midst of their 18-game unbeaten streak, but that did not stop Conroy from deviating from his plan. He was still going to sell, which on February 28th, they decided to trade Chris Tanev to the Dallas Stars for a 2nd round pick and a conditional 3rd round pick. That condition was never met. A little bit of a disappointing return, but at least they got something, and Hanifin was next. A week later, they traded Noah Hanifin to the Vegas Golden Knights for a 2026 first-round pick that could be very valuable, as well as a 3rd-round pick in Danil Miramanov. It was an okay price for Noah Hanifin. So all in all, if you combine Zadorov, Lindholm, Tanev, and Hanifin, this was the total haul. They got Hunter Brustevich, Andrei Kuzmenko, Miramanov, the Canucks' 2024 first-round pick, Vegas' 2026 first-round pick, the Stars' 2024 second-round pick, Vegas' 2024 third-round pick, and the Canucks' 2026 third-round pick. It was a lot of players to get traded, but they did get a solid return overall. And then post March 7th, the players kind of understood the assignment. The coaches understood the assignment a little bit. They went 7-13 to go from around picking the range of like 13th to 14th overall, and they ended up selecting 9th overall because they were so bad at the end of the season. However, Conroy was not done trading. He still had some expiring in 2 years guys that he wanted to get out for assets and fully commit to this rebuild. He decided to get ahead of the goalie market and traded Jacob Markstrom to the New Jersey Devils for a 2025 first-round pick in Kevin Ball. And then the day before the draft, they traded away Andrew Mangiapane to the Washington Capitals, who was making $5.75 million. They didn't have to retain any money on that, and they got a second-round pick. And Mangiapane had 35 goals in 2022. He was amazing then, but had kind of regressed to around the 40-ish point guy. So that was a very solid deal for them. And then at the draft, after acquiring all these goddamn picks, Craig Conroy had his magnum opus when looking at it. He got so much value at nearly every single selection. Zane Perrick at 9th overall, who I thought was the best defenseman in the entire draft. He had 96 points in 66 games, the most among an OHL defenseman in their draft year of the 21st century. To get him at 9th was insane. They selected Matvei Gridin at 28th, which wasn't a steal by any means, but he was viewed as a late first-round pick, and he led the entire USHL in points. Then they got Andrew Bash at 41st overall, who was a little bit of a steal. He was expected to be a late first-round pick, and especially as a WHL kid that grew up as a Flames fan, that is music to Flames fans' ears after all the guys that have left recently. It started to get insane at 74th overall with Henry Muse, who was viewed as a lottery pick entering his draft year, and he had a very good draft year still, having 61 points in 65 games. Maybe doesn't have the highest ceiling, but at 74th overall, this guy was expected to be a late first-round pick, early second. Then lastly, they picked up another guy out of the CHL, and Luke Misa. He is 5'10", but this dude had 81 points in 66 games in his draft year and was widely viewed as around the second-round pick. They got him in the 5th at 150th. In free agency, Craig Conroy does not spend any money to keep this team half decent. The only deal that he makes is Anthony Mantha, 1 year at $3.5 million. What does that scream to me? That screams like they're going to trade him at the deadline for a second or a third at half retained. I love it. And now going back to the Markstrom and retaining money, Conroy has $19 million of cap space, so he can take on some bad contracts or retain money at the deadline to rack up even more assets. I love how they just didn't spend for the sake of spending. So yeah, in conclusion, it is just so crazy how the Flames have changed in these last 2 years. You look at it 2 years ago, fresh off of trading Huberdeau and Weegar, signing Huberdeau to that massive deal, signing Kadri, a 32-year-old, to a 7-year deal, and they had the 28th best prospect pool, according to The Athletic at the time. They were all in. To them now having a top 15 consensus prospect pool in the NHL, it's only going to go up next year because none of their guys are really debuting. Having 2 first-round picks, having 2 second-round picks this year, having 2 first-round picks in 2026, and they just have an actual direction. They have a direction now instead of just being this average team. It truly looked like Brad Treliving had doomed this franchise for just pure mediocrity. They were just going to ride it out with Huberdeau, Weegar, and Kadri and just be this perfectly average team, never truly rebuild. But Craig Conroy came in, and you could debate how much he won every trade. I'm sure he lost some trades, but the fact that he decided to enter this rebuild, trade basically every pending guy on the books that had some value. He's obviously still stuck with Huberdeau, Kadri, and the Weegar deal is perfectly fine, but he decided to make, he has a plan. He has a plan. He doesn't have a concept of a plan. He went in the 2023-2024 season and executed his plan, and if you're a Flames fan, you got to be happy. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the Calgary Flames the last 2 years. It has been an absolutely wild last 2 years, but I am happy that now they're just trending in the right direction. They're sticking to picking CHL guys. They're not messing with any Americans for a while, and yeah, I'm very optimistic on Craig Conroy. I've shat on the Flames the past from like 2022 to 2023, considering because they just were this completely mid-team, but I have completely flipped on them, and I think they have one of the brightest futures in the entire NHL. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what do you think about it? What do you think about these more so video essay type of videos? Do you like them? I can't make them like every day. They take a lot longer than my other videos, but let me know in the comments, what do you think? I'll be seeing you in the next one.